The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning Westbrook into a gloomy labyrinth of puddles and murky reflections. I hurried along the cracked sidewalk, my thin jacket soaked through, clinging to my skin like a desperate memory. My shift at Carlisle's diner had run 2 hours over, and my feet throbbed with each step toward the bus stop. 6 months in this city, and I still felt like a ghost passing through other people's lives, unseen, unheard, barely existing. I hugged my purse closer, mentally calculating how much of this week's tips would go toward my overdue electric bill. $27 short, even with the extra shift. The weight of constant worry had become so familiar I hardly noticed it anymore. Like background music in a film nobody was watching. That's when I heard it. A small, hiccuping sob cutting through the steady drumming of rain. I stopped, water seeping through the holes in my worn sneakers, and listened. There it was again, coming from the small park I usually hurried past after dark. "Hello?" I called, squinting through the rain toward the playground equipment, dark shapes like sleeping monsters in the twilight. No answer, but the sobbing continued. I should have kept walking. Every city instinct screamed to mind my business, make it home before full dark. But something in that sound, raw and lost, pulled me like an invisible thread. I stepped off the sidewalk, my feet sinking into muddy grass. "Is someone there? Are you okay?" The old swing set creaked in the damp breeze as I approached, and that's when I saw him. A small boy huddled beneath the covered slide, knees pulled to his chest. He couldn't have been more than 5 or 6, dressed in what looked like expensive clothes now spattered with mud. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and when he looked up, his eyes were swollen from crying. "Hey there," I said softly, crouching a few feet away. "Are you lost?" He nodded, lower lip trembling. "I can't find my daddy." My heart clenched. I glanced around the empty park, rain cascading from the trees in silvery curtains. No frantic parent calling a name, no search party, just us and the gathering darkness. "What's your name?" "I'm Emma." Marco," he whispered. "Marco," I repeated, smiling. "That's a strong name. How long have you been out here?" He shrugged, wiping his nose on his sleeve. The sun was still here. I was playing, and then I couldn't see Sal anymore. Fresh tears welled in his eyes. "Who's Sal?" "He watches me when Daddy works." Alarm bells rang in my head. This child had been alone for hours, separated from his caretaker. I inched closer, sheltering under the playground equipment. "How about we try to find your dad together? Do you know his phone number?" Marco shook his head, and I noticed a small silver chain around his neck, disappearing beneath his shirt. He followed my gaze and pulled out what looked like a medallion. "Daddy says if I'm ever scared, hold this and he'll find me." I reached for my phone, intending to call the police, when a strange sensation crawled up my spine, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. My fingers froze mid-air as I slowly turned to scan the perimeter of the park. Nothing moved except the rain and wind-tossed branches, but something had changed in the quality of the silence surrounding us. The emptiness felt occupied. "Why don't we get you somewhere dry and we can figure this out?" I suggested, my voice unnaturally bright even to my own ears. As Marco stood, a black SUV with tinted windows rolled silently to the curb across from the park. I instinctively shifted, placing myself between the vehicle and the child. The driver's door opened, and a man in a dark suit stepped out, unfolding an umbrella with practiced precision. I reached for Marco's hand, prepared to run, when the rear door opened. The man who emerged didn't rush. He stood for a moment beside the vehicle, his face in shadow beneath a black umbrella. Even from 30 feet away, I felt the air change, growing heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that the rain didn't dare touch. No urgency in his movements, only coiled purpose. "Daddy!" Marco's voice broke with relief as he pulled away from me, running across the muddy grass. The man knelt, setting his umbrella aside as the child crashed into his arms. The rain soaked his suit, but he didn't seem to notice or care. For a few moments, they existed in their own world. The man's broad shoulders curved protectively around the boy, his face buried in Marco's hair. I stood frozen, suddenly feeling like an intruder. I should leave. This family reunion wasn't my business. But my feet wouldn't move. The man lifted his face, and even through the rain, I felt the weight of his attention settle on me like a physical touch. A shiver that had nothing to do with my wet clothes ran through me. He stood, lifting Marco effortlessly with one arm, and walked toward me with measured steps. With each footfall, details emerged from the rain: broad shoulders under expensive wool, a clean-shaven jaw with a slight scar near the chin, dark hair cropped short at the sides. But it was his eyes that rooted me in place, amber brown and unblinking, studying me with the calm assessment of a predator. "You found my son." His voice was low, with a rough edge that suggested it could become dangerous if provoked. Not a question, but a statement of fact. He was alone, crying. My own voice sounded small. I was going to call someone. Something flickered across his face. So fast I might have imagined it. The suited man with the umbrella had materialized beside us, holding it over his boss while keeping a respectful distance. "Marco, did this lady help you?" The man asked his son, but his eyes never left mine. The boy nodded against his father's shoulder. "She was going to help me find you." The man's gaze traveled over my soaked clothes, lingering on my name tag still pinned to my jacket, the worn edges of my sleeves, the exhaustion I couldn't hide. I fought the urge to shrink under his scrutiny. "You're shivering," he observed. I became acutely aware of how I must look. Hair plastered to my face, makeup long since washed away, the pathetic excuse for a jacket clinging to my body. "I'm fine. Just need to catch my bus." I gestured vaguely toward the stop, suddenly desperate to escape the intensity of his presence. "I insist on giving you a ride. As thanks." His tone made it clear this wasn't truly a request. "That's really not necessary. It's pouring, and buses in this district run every 40 minutes after 8. His knowledge of the local schedule wasn't as surprising as the fact that he'd noticed the time. "I'm Antonio Russo." The name hung in the rain-soaked air between us. Something about it tickled the back of my mind. A newspaper headline, perhaps, or a whispered conversation at the diner. But in that moment, with his eyes locked on mine, I couldn't place it. "Emma Clark," I responded automatically, immediately regretting giving my full name to a stranger. "Miss Clark." He tested my name like a new word. "You helped my son when others would have walked past. Allow me to ensure you get home safely." Every instinct urged caution, but the rain was coming down harder now, thunder rumbling in the distance. The bus would be crowded if it came at all, and my apartment was a 20-minute ride away. "Just a ride," I conceded, immediately feeling like I'd failed some test I hadn't known I was taking. Antonio nodded to the suited man, who moved to open the car's rear door. As we approached the vehicle, I noticed a second SUV parked behind the first, with 2 more men inside, watching the surroundings with alert eyes. "You have an escort," I observed, immediately regretting drawing attention to it. Antonio's mouth curved slightly at one corner. Not quite a smile, a necessary precaution in my position. He settled Marco into a built-in child seat before gesturing for me to enter. The interior smelled of leather and something woodsy and expensive. As I slid across the seat, I noticed a partition separating us from the driver, and what looked suspiciously like bulletproof glass in the windows. What kind of businessman needs bulletproof cars and a security detail? Antonio sat beside me, close enough that I caught the scent of his cologne. Cedar and spice with an undertone of something uniquely him. Marco leaned his head against his father's arm, exhaustion finally catching up to him. "Where do you live, Miss Clark?" Antonio asked as the vehicle pulled smoothly away from the curb. I hesitated, then gave an intersection 3 blocks from my actual apartment. Something warned me not to be too specific. If he noticed my caution, he didn't comment. "You're not from Westbrook," he stated, as the city slid past our windows in a blur of neon and rain. "Is it that obvious?" I attempted a smile. "You have a softness this city hasn't stolen yet." His eyes moved over my face. "Madison, perhaps? Or further west?" A chill prickled along my spine. I'd come from Madison 6 months ago, but I hadn't told him that. Before I could respond, he continued. "Carlisle's is fortunate to have you, though I imagine serving overcooked steaks to businessmen wasn't your dream." He'd noted my name tag, I reminded myself. Still, his attention to detail was unnerving. It pays the bills, most of them anyway. I said, trying to keep my tone light. Something hardened in his expression. Thomas Carlyle should pay his staff better. His profit margins certainly allow for it. The casual mention of my boss's first name and financial situation suggested a familiarity that made me increasingly uneasy. Who was this man? How old is Marco? I asked, deliberately changing the subject. Antonio glanced at his son, now dozing against his side. Something in his expression softened. 6. Too curious for his own good sometimes. What happened today? I ventured. The softness vanished. A miscommunication. Someone's last day of employment. The finality in his tone made me shiver again. We rode in silence for several blocks, the only sound the rain drumming on the roof and Marco's soft breathing. I became acutely aware of Antonio's presence beside me, the controlled power in his stillness, the way he took up space without moving. He was watching the passing streets, but I felt his awareness of me like a physical touch. Your neighborhood, he said eventually as the vehicle slowed. Relief washed through me as I recognized the corner I'd specified. I reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Allow me, Antonio said, pressing something on his armrest. The suited man appeared outside, opening my door and extending an umbrella. Thank you for the ride, I said, gathering my purse and preparing to step out into the rain. Antonio caught my wrist, his grip firm but not painful. The contact sent a jolt through me that had nothing to do with fear, or at least, not entirely fear. You're working tomorrow? He asked, though something in his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Yes, morning shift. He released me, reaching into his jacket to withdraw a business card. The paper was thick and cream-colored, with only a phone number embossed in dark ink. If you ever need anything, Miss Clark? He placed the card in my palm, his fingers brushing against mine with deliberate intent. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I understood that my life had just irrevocably changed course. I had crossed the path of someone powerful and dangerous, someone who now knew my name, where I worked, and approximately where I lived. Goodbye, Mr. Russo, I managed, stepping out into the rain beneath the shelter of the umbrella. I watched the vehicle pull away, its taillights bleeding red into the wet darkness. Only when it had disappeared around a corner did I realize I was clutching the business card so tightly it had creased in my palm. 3 blocks to my apartment, walking through the rain, I couldn't shake the feeling that my encounter with Marco had been no accident, and that Antonio Russo was not finished with me. I didn't know it then, but I had just made the first move in a game whose rules I didn't understand, with a man who never lost. Sleep evaded me that night. I tossed in my narrow bed, rain tapping against my window like impatient fingers, as Antonio Russo's amber eyes haunted the darkness behind my eyelids. The business card lay on my nightstand, its embossed number catching the blue glow of my alarm clock. 3:17 a.m. I'd have to be up in 3 hours for my shift. The next morning arrived in a haze of exhaustion. I fumbled through my apartment, a cramped studio with water stains on the ceiling, and a temperamental radiator that clanked and wheezed, but rarely provided actual heat. The previous tenant's yellow curtains, the only splash of color in the place, hung limply over windows that faced a brick wall. 6 months here, and I still hadn't bothered to replace them. My phone buzzed with a text from my manager as I was pulling on my uniform. Need you to stay late again, Jenna called out. No question, no apology. Just another command that would stretch my 12-hour shift into 14. I typed back a quick okay and slipped the phone into my pocket, ignoring the hollow feeling in my chest. Outside, Westbrook had emerged from the rain renewed, streets glistening under a tentative autumn sun. The walk to the bus stop felt different somehow. My senses hyper-aware, scanning faces, noticing dark cars, feeling exposed. Was I being paranoid? Or had my encounter with Antonio Russo made me suddenly visible in a city where I'd been invisible for months? Carlyle's Diner occupied the ground floor of a renovated brick building downtown, its red leather booths and chrome accents aiming for nostalgic charm, but achieving only dated weariness. I tied my apron with practiced movements, pinned my name tag in place, and plastered on the smile that was as much a part of my uniform as the unflattering polyester dress. You look like hell, Em, Diane, our 60-something hostess, remarked as I filled coffee cups for the morning rush. Rough night? Something like that, I mumbled, avoiding her too perceptive gaze. The morning passed in a blur of pancake orders and coffee refills, the mundane rhythm almost convincing me that last night had been a strange dream. Almost. Until noon. I was balancing plates for a 4-top when the atmosphere in the diner shifted. Conversations dimmed. Silverware paused mid-clink, and heads turned toward the entrance. Diane stood frozen by the hostess stand, her usual greeting stuck in her throat. Before I even looked up, I knew. Some primal instinct recognized his presence, the way the air charged, molecules rearranging themselves around his gravity. Antonio Russo stood in the doorway, today in a navy suit, tailored to emphasize broad shoulders and a lean waist. The scar near his chin caught the light, a silver thread against his skin. Unlike my memory from the rain-distorted night, he was younger than I'd thought, mid-30s perhaps, with strands of silver at his temples that spoke more of stress than age. 2 men flanked him. One I recognized as the umbrella holder from last night, the other new but cut from the same cloth. Watchful eyes, bulge of a shoulder holster barely concealed by his jacket, they surveyed the diner with practiced efficiency while maintaining a respectful distance from their boss. My fingers went numb. The plates I was holding wobbled dangerously. Emma? His voice carried across the diner, my name in his mouth sounding like something precious and rare. Diane's head whipped toward me, her penciled eyebrows disappearing into her hairline. Every customer, every server, every cook peering through the kitchen window. All eyes followed the trajectory from him to me. Mr. Russo, I managed, willing my hands to steady. He crossed the diner with unhurried confidence, as if the space had been designed for his movement. The booths were suddenly too small, the ceiling too low to contain his presence. Please, he said as he approached. Antonio. I became acutely aware of how I must look. Hair hastily pulled back, yesterday's mascara smudged beneath my eyes, cheap polyester uniform that had gone through too many wash cycles. He, meanwhile, seemed carved from something finer than ordinary flesh, each movement deliberate and fluid. I've come to take you to lunch, he announced. Not a question, but not quite a command either. The plates in my hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy. I'm working, I said, gesturing weakly with my chin toward the food I was holding. Something like amusement flickered in his eyes. He turned slightly, addressing my manager who had materialized from the back office, drawn by the unusual silence in his normally bustling establishment. Thomas, Antonio greeted him with cool familiarity. Miss Clark will be taking her break now. I trust that won't be a problem. The color drained from my manager's face. Thomas Carlyle, who had denied my request for time off to attend my grandmother's funeral 2 months ago, nodded like a bobblehead doll. Of course, Mr. Russo. Take all the time you need, Emma. I stood speechless as one of Antonio's men stepped forward, gently taking the plates from my hands and delivering them to the waiting table with surprising grace. Your coat? Antonio prompted. In the break room, I said faintly. Marco asked about you this morning, he continued, as if this explained everything. He wanted to thank you properly. He's waiting at the restaurant. The mention of the boy softened something in me. Despite my unease, the memory of those tear-filled eyes made resistance difficult. 15 minutes, I conceded, as if I had any real choice. I get 15 minutes for lunch. Antonio's mouth curved in that not-quite smile. We'll see. I untied my apron with trembling fingers, acutely aware of the whispers following us as he escorted me to the break room. His presence in the cramped space made it shrink further, dented lockers, and the ancient microwave suddenly embarrassing in their shabbiness. As I pulled my coat from its hook, Antonio's gaze traveled around the room, lingering on the employee schedule pinned to the corkboard. I had the distinct impression he was memorizing it. Outside, the same black SUV waited at the curb. The driver held the door as Antonio guided me with a light touch at the small of my back, a touch that, despite its gentleness, contained unmistakable possession. Where are we going? I asked as we pulled away from the curb, anxiety fluttering in my chest like a trapped bird. Terranova? He replied. It's not far. I stiffened. Terra Nova was the most exclusive restaurant in Westbrook, a place where the wealthy and powerful conducted business over $100 plates of pasta. In my waitress uniform, I might as well be walking in naked. "I can't go there like this," I protested, gesturing at my clothes. Antonio studied me, his gaze thoughtful. "You underestimate yourself, Emma Clark." The way he said my name, like he was tasting it, sent a shiver down my spine, not entirely unpleasant, and that realization disturbed me more than anything else. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, finally voicing the question that had kept me awake all night. He was quiet for a long moment, watching the city slide past our windows. "You showed kindness to my son when you had nothing to gain. That's unusual in my world." There was something raw in his voice, a brief glimpse behind the controlled exterior that made me wonder what his world was really like. "Anyone would have helped a lost child," I said. No, the single word held absolute certainty. Most would have called authorities and walked away. Or worse, seen opportunity. The implication hung in the air between us. Before I could respond, the vehicle pulled up to Terra Nova's discreet entrance, where a valet rushed forward to open the door. If the diner had gone quiet when Antonio entered, Terra Nova transformed entirely. The maitre d' abandoned a couple in evening wear to greet us, bowing slightly. "Mr. Russo, your usual table is ready." As he led us through the restaurant, I noticed how staff and diners alike reacted, some nodding respectfully, others carefully avoiding eye contact. A path cleared before us without anyone being asked to move. Even in my stained uniform, walking beside Antonio Russo made me untouchable. Marco sat at a corner table, partially concealed by an artful arrangement of plants, a coloring book and crayons spread before him. A woman in a sleek pantsuit stood nearby, her watchful eyes marking her as security rather than a nanny. When Marco spotted us, his face lit up. "Emma!" he exclaimed with the unfiltered delight only children can manage. "You came!" Something in my chest ached at his excitement. I smiled, genuinely this time. "Hello again, Marco." As I sat, I noticed every detail of the table setting. Crystal water glasses, silver so polished it reflected the soft lighting, white orchids in a simple arrangement. The menu had no prices, which told me everything I needed to know. "I ordered your favorite," Antonio told his son, who bounced in his seat. "Spaghetti and meatballs," Marco informed me proudly. "Do you like spaghetti?" "I do," I said, my tension easing slightly in the face of his innocent enthusiasm. Antonio watched our exchange with an intensity that made my skin flush. When Marco became absorbed in his coloring, he leaned slightly toward me. "I looked into your situation, Emma." The ease I'd been feeling evaporated instantly. "My situation? Your apartment on Lakeside Drive, the electric bill, the student loans." Ice flooded my veins. "How do you—" "It's what I do." He lifted a hand, dismissing my alarm as waitstaff appeared, serving plates without taking orders. "I gather information." "That's invasive," I said, fighting to keep my voice down. "And inappropriate." Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "What's inappropriate is Thomas Carlyle paying you $8 an hour while he takes home 6 figures. What's inappropriate is your landlord ignoring the black mold in your bathroom ceiling." I stared at him, speechless. How could he possibly know about the mold? "You're struggling unnecessarily," he continued, his voice softening. "I can help." "Why would you want to?" I managed. His eyes moved over my face, lingering on my lips before meeting my gaze again. "Let's say you've awakened my curiosity." Before I could respond, Marco tugged at my sleeve. "Do you want to see my picture?" Grateful for the interruption, I turned my attention to his coloring book, admiring the superhero he'd filled with impossible colors. As we ate, Marco chattered about his school and friends, while Antonio watched us with an expression I couldn't decipher, something between satisfaction and hunger. When dessert arrived, tiramisu I hadn't ordered but devoured anyway, I checked my phone and gasped, "I've been gone almost an hour." Antonio signaled the server, who appeared instantly with the check. He signed without looking at the total. "I need to get back," I insisted, gathering my things. Of course. He rose smoothly, helping Marco with his jacket. We'll take you. The ride back to the diner passed in silence, Marco dozing against his father's side. When we arrived, Antonio turned to me. I have business in Chicago until Friday. Have dinner with us when I return. Again, not quite a question. I hesitated, every rational thought screaming caution. I don't think that's a good idea. His expression didn't change, but something in the air between us tightened. Because you're afraid of me? Should I be? The words slipped out before I could stop them. Antonio reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers brushed my cheek, leaving a trail of heat. Never, he said softly. But everyone else should. I climbed out of the SUV on unsteady legs, aware of eyes watching from inside the diner. As the vehicle pulled away, Marco waved sleepily from the window. The questions began the moment I stepped inside. Emma Clark. Diane cornered me by the coffee station. Do you have any idea who that was? Antonio Russo, I said, tying my apron with trembling fingers. Her heavily lined eyes widened. Antonio Russo, who owns half the waterfront. Antonio Russo, whose name makes grown men piss themselves. What the hell did you do to catch his attention? I found his son in the park last night, I explained, the mundane truth sounding inadequate even to my ears. Diane snorted. Girl, men like that don't take waitresses to lunch at Terra Nova for finding lost kids. They send a fruit basket. As I moved through the rest of my shift in a daze, whispers followed me. Customers who had ignored me for months suddenly knew my name. My manager, who had scheduled me for 7 straight days without overtime, offered me Saturday off. Something fundamental had shifted in my universe, and Antonio Russo was the center of the disturbance. Back in my apartment that night, I stood under a lukewarm shower. The building never had enough hot water after 8 p.m., replaying every moment of our encounter, the way he said my name, the casual display of power, the gentle way he touched my face. I wrapped myself in my threadbare towel and padded to the bedroom, freezing when I saw my front door. It was closed and locked, just as I had left it, but hanging on the doorknob was a garment bag I had definitely not put there. Heart pounding, I approached it slowly. A cream-colored card was pinned to the front, my name written in elegant script. With shaking fingers, I unzipped the bag to reveal a dress in deep emerald silk. Simple, elegant, and undoubtedly expensive. The card contained only a date, Friday, and an address. No signature was needed. I sank onto my bed, the silk cool and dangerous beneath my fingers. I should call the police. I should throw the dress away. I should pack my things and disappear. Instead, I found myself lifting the dress against my body, turning toward the cloudy mirror on my closet door. The woman who looked back at me was someone I didn't recognize, eyes too bright, cheeks flushed, lips parted in a mixture of fear and something else. Something that felt dangerously like anticipation. Antonio Russo had not only entered my life, he was rewriting it without permission. And despite every warning bell sounding in my mind, I couldn't say with certainty that I wanted him to stop. Friday arrived with the inevitability of a gathering storm. I spent the 3 days between Terra Nova and our date in a state of nervous anticipation, jumping at shadows and studying every black vehicle that passed the diner windows. Antonio had not contacted me, but his presence lingered everywhere. Thomas Carlyle suddenly discovered overtime pay existed. The persistent leak under my kitchen sink was fixed without my requesting maintenance. A delivery man arrived with premium groceries I hadn't ordered, claiming a subscription service had been paid for 6 months. I had no illusions about who was behind these changes. Each night I stood before my closet, running my fingers over the emerald silk dress, torn between outrage at the invasion of privacy and a secret thrill at being seen, truly seen, for the first time since arriving in Westbrook. The thought of Antonio studying me so carefully that he knew my size perfectly was both unsettling and intoxicating. Diane cornered me during my Friday morning shift, her eyes sharp as tacks. "You're glowing," she accused, tapping one long fingernail against her coffee mug. "And jumpy as a cat, spill it." I busied myself wiping down the counter. "There's nothing to spill," she snorted. "Honey, I've been around the block enough times to know when a woman's got a man on her mind. especially a dangerous man. She leaned closer. Word is, people who cross Antonio Russo tend to take unexpected vacations, permanent ones. My hand stilled on the counter. What exactly have you heard about him? Diane glanced around before lowering her voice. His family controls most of the shipping in and out of Westbrook Harbor, the legitimate kind and the other kind. She raised her penciled eyebrows meaningfully. City officials look the other way because accidents happen when people ask too many questions. The cold knot in my stomach tightened. I'd suspected Antonio wasn't merely a businessman, but hearing it confirmed made it impossible to pretend otherwise. I was having dinner with a man who was almost certainly a criminal, possibly worse. I should cancel, I murmured, more to myself than Diane. She patted my hand, surprising me with unexpected gentleness. Just be careful, Emma. Men like that, they don't see people like us as equals. We're possessions, trophies. Her eyes held the wisdom of hard-earned experience. And if you become his, you'll never truly be your own again. Her words followed me through the rest of my shift, echoing in my mind as I showered and stood before my mirror that evening. The emerald dress fit as if it had been made for me, the silk cool against my skin, the cut modest yet undeniably flattering. I'd never owned anything so fine, had never even touched fabric of this quality before. At precisely 8 o'clock, a knock came at my door. I took a steadying breath before opening it, expecting Antonio's suited henchman. Instead, Antonio himself stood in my dingy hallway, making the peeling paint and buzzing fluorescent light seem even shabbier in contrast to his immaculate presence. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than my yearly rent, a crisp white shirt open at the collar. The casualness of the missing tie made him look both more approachable and somehow more dangerous. His eyes moved over me slowly, appreciation evident in their amber depths. Emma. My name in his mouth still sounded like a benediction. You shouldn't have sent the dress, I said, finding my voice. Or the groceries. Or interfered with my job. A slight smile curved his lips. You're wearing it. That's not the point. It suits you perfectly. His eyes continued their unhurried assessment. As I knew it would, heat crept up my neck. How did you get into my apartment? I own the building. I blinked, processing this information. Since when? Tuesday afternoon. My mouth fell open. You bought my entire apartment building? It was mismanaged, he replied, as if purchasing real estate was a perfectly reasonable response to meeting someone new. The superintendent has been replaced. You'll notice improvements soon. I struggled to find words, torn between outrage and a bewildering sense of flattery that someone would go to such lengths for my comfort. No one had ever considered my well-being worth even minor inconvenience, let alone the purchase of an entire building. This isn't normal, I finally managed. I'm not a normal man. He offered his arm. Shall we? Against my better judgment, I locked my door and took his arm, hyper-aware of the solid muscle beneath the expensive fabric. We walked down the hall together, my neighbors peering through barely cracked doors, witnessing the strange tableau of Antonio Russo escorting the quiet girl from 3B. This time, there was no security detail visible, though I suspected they were nearby. The car waiting at the curb was different too, a sleek silver Bentley with a discreet driver who opened the door without meeting my eyes. Where's Marco? I asked as we pulled away from the curb, the buttery leather seats making me acutely conscious of my own humble origins. With his grandmother for the weekend. Antonio sat beside me, close enough that I caught the now familiar scent of his cologne. Tonight is just us. The simple statement sent a shiver down my spine. In the confines of the Bentley, his presence seemed even more overwhelming. Something primal and compelling that made it difficult to remember all the reasons I should be running in the opposite direction. Where are we going? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. My home. I tensed. I thought we were going to a restaurant. Antonio turned to face me, his expression serious. I have enemies, Emma. Being seen with me in public places puts you at risk. But lunch at Terra Nova was a calculated risk, one I won't repeat unnecessarily. His hand moved to cover mine where it rested on the seat between us. My home is secure. We won't be observed or interrupted there. The warning bells in my mind grew louder. Going to his home meant no witnesses, no public setting to moderate his behavior. Yet the gentle pressure of his hand on mine didn't feel threatening. It felt like an anchor in increasingly turbulent waters. "Who are you, really?" I asked softly. His thumb traced circles on my skin. "You already know the answer to that question." "I want to hear you say it." Antonio studied me for a long moment. "My family has controlled certain aspects of this city's commerce for 3 generations. I inherited that responsibility 11 years ago, when my father was killed." The clinical way he mentioned his father's murder sent a chill through me. "And Marco's mother?" I ventured. A shadow crossed his face. "She left when he was an infant, decided our life wasn't what she'd expected. There was old pain there, buried beneath layers of control." Before I could ask more, the Bentley turned through an elaborate gate set into a high stone wall. Security cameras swiveled to track our progress up a winding driveway lined with perfectly manicured trees. Antonio's home was not the ostentatious mansion I had expected, but a sprawling modern structure of glass, stone, and wood that seemed to grow organically from the landscape. Lights illuminated strategic areas of the grounds where armed men patrolled discreetly. "This is beautiful," I said honestly as the Bentley stopped at the entrance. "It's designed to be defensible without appearing fortress-like," Antonio replied, revealing more in that simple statement than perhaps he intended. Inside, the house opened into soaring spaces filled with museum-quality art and minimal but clearly expensive furniture. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the darkened grounds and the distant lights of Westbrook beyond. No family photos adorned the walls, no personal mementos cluttered the surfaces. It felt more like a very exclusive hotel than a home. "You live here alone? Just you and Marco?" I asked, following Antonio through the main living area. "And the staff, security team." "Marco's tutor." He led me onto a covered terrace where a table had been set for 2, candles flickering in the evening breeze. "They have their own quarters." A silver-haired man in a chef's coat appeared with wine and appetizers, nodding respectfully to Antonio before retreating. No introductions were made, reinforcing my growing understanding of Antonio's world. People existed in strictly defined roles, with clear hierarchies and careful distances maintained. As we ate the most exquisite meal I'd ever tasted, Antonio asked about my life, my childhood in Madison, my truncated college education, my grandmother who had raised me. He listened with an intensity that made me feel like every mundane detail of my existence was fascinating to him. I found myself revealing things I rarely shared: my abandoned dreams of becoming a photographer, the illness that had drained my savings and forced me to drop out of school, the loneliness of starting over in Westbrook. "Why did you choose this city?" he asked, refilling my wine glass. I shrugged. It was far enough away to be a fresh start, close enough that I could visit my grandmother's grave sometimes. And the bus ticket was cheap. Something like anger flickered across his face. "The arbitrary cruelty of circumstance," he murmured. "You deserved better." "Everyone thinks they deserve better," I said, uncomfortable with his assessment. "Life just is what it is." "No." The single word held absolute conviction. "The world bends to will and power, Emma. Circumstance is just an obstacle to be overcome." His certainty was both attractive and frightening. In Antonio's worldview, there were no immovable objects, only insufficient force applied. After dinner, he showed me through the house, a tour that carefully included some spaces while obviously excluding others. I noticed secure doors requiring fingerprint access, areas where the security detail was more concentrated. Marco's wing was bright and child-friendly, filled with toys and books, a stark contrast to the austere elegance of the rest of the house. In Antonio's private study, I paused before a large painting, a stormy seascape where a single beam of light broke through dark clouds. "You appreciate art," he observed, standing close enough that I could feel the heat of his body. "I recognize quality when I see it," I replied, turning to face him. "Even if I can't afford it." "What else do you recognize, Emma Clark?" His voice had dropped lower, a rough edge betraying carefully controlled desire. He was standing very close now, his eyes intent on mine. The air between us seemed charged with electricity, making it difficult to breathe. Danger, I whispered truthfully. Antonio lifted his hand slowly, giving me time to pull away and trace the line of my jaw with his fingertips. Yes, there is danger here. His touch was feather-light, but I felt it like a brand against my skin. But not from me, never from me. The people who would use me to hurt you, I guessed, understanding dawning. That's why you're keeping me away from public places. His expression darkened. I have enemies who wouldn't hesitate to strike at me through anyone I show interest in. Is that what I am? An interest? His thumb brushed my lower lip, sending a shock of sensation through me. You are becoming much more than that, he admitted, his voice rough. And it's terrifying me. The confession, so at odds with his controlled exterior, broke something loose inside me. I leaned forward, closing the distance between us, and pressed my lips to his. For one breathless moment, he remained perfectly still. Then his control shattered. His arms encircled me, pulling me against the hard planes of his body, as his mouth claimed mine with hungry intensity. I gasped against his lips, my hands finding purchase on his shoulders as he walked me backward until I felt the edge of his desk behind me. His kiss was nothing like I'd imagined. Not cold or calculating, but desperate and consuming, as if he'd been starving for this contact. One hand tangled in my hair, the other at the small of my back, pressing me closer. I felt the careful boundaries he maintained crumbling as he groaned my name against my lips. The ringing of a phone cut through the heated moment like a splash of cold water. Antonio pulled back, his breathing ragged, eyes dark with want. For a second, he seemed ready to ignore it, his gaze fixed on my lips. Then something shifted in his expression, the mask of control sliding back into place as he recognized the specific ringtone. I have to take this, he said, his voice still rough. It's Marco's security detail. Fear instantly replaced desire. Is he okay? Antonio squeezed my hand before releasing me, pulling the phone from his pocket. Russo, he answered, his tone clipped and professional. I watched as he listened, his expression hardening into something cold and dangerous, so different from the man who had held me moments before, that it was like witnessing a transformation. Bring him here immediately, he ordered. Full protocol. And find Salvatore. Now. He ended the call, already moving toward the door. All business. What's happened? I asked, following him. Marco's grandmother received a threatening call. His voice was emotionless, but I could see the fury and fear simmering beneath the surface. Standard procedure is to bring him to me. Is he in danger? Antonio paused, seeming to debate how much to tell me. It's most likely a scare tactic, but I take no chances with my son. The house suddenly hummed with activity. Security personnel appearing from unseen locations, communications equipment being checked, weapons becoming visible where they had been concealed before. I should go, I said, feeling like an intruder in this crisis. Antonio turned to me, his expression softening fractionally. No, stay. He took my hand, his grip firm. Please, Marco would want to see you. The vulnerability in that request made it impossible to refuse. I nodded, allowing him to lead me back to the main living area that was now becoming a command center of sorts. Antonio issued orders with the confidence of a general, personnel responding with immediate obedience. Within 15 minutes, Marco arrived in a convoy of black SUVs, escorted by men whose practiced movements revealed military training. The boy ran to his father the moment he entered, Antonio crouching to catch him in a fierce embrace. Over Marco's shoulder, his eyes met mine, dark with something primal and protective that made my breath catch. Emma. Marco noticed me, his face lighting up despite the tension surrounding us. You're here for dinner too? I managed a smile, kneeling to his level. I was. How are you feeling? Nonna was scared. He confided in a whisper, but I wasn't. Daddy says Russos don't show fear. Antonio's jaw tightened at his son's words, pride and regret warring in his expression. He placed a hand on Marco's shoulder. Even Russos are allowed to be afraid sometimes, Piccolo. What matters is what we do with that fear. A man in a tailored suit approached, his posture deferential, but his eyes hard. The perimeter is secure, sir. We've identified the source of the call. It came from inside the Castellano organization. Antonio nodded once, his face settling into dangerous stillness. Vincent, take Marco to the safe room. Emma will accompany you. Daddy? Marco's voice wavered for the first time, his small fingers clutching his father's sleeve. Antonio knelt again, cupping his son's face in his hands. I need to speak with some people. Vincent will take care of you, and Emma will keep you company. I'll come get you soon. The boy searched his father's face, then nodded with a solemnity no 6-year-old should possess. The man named Vincent gestured for us to follow, leading us through a door concealed in the wood paneling of the main hallway. We descended a short flight of stairs into what appeared to be a fortified apartment. Living area, small kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and what I assumed was a bathroom. The heavy door sealed behind us with the hiss of an airlock, multiple locks engaging automatically. Secure communication is there, Vincent told me, pointing to a console near the door. Press the red button for Mr. Russo directly. Marco tugged at my hand. Want to see my secret room toys? They're better than my regular toys. Vincent gave me a small nod before stationing himself by the door, hand resting casually near his concealed weapon. I followed Marco to a child-sized table where elaborate building blocks and action figures were arranged. Do you come down here often? I asked, keeping my voice light as I sat cross-legged beside him. Sometimes when Daddy has business meetings, Marco replied, selecting blocks with careful consideration. Vincent says it's like a submarine, but cooler 'cause it has pizza. I glanced around, noticing the fully stocked kitchen, the air filtration system, the absence of windows. This wasn't merely a panic room, it was designed for extended occupation. Are you scared? Marco asked suddenly, his dark eyes, so like his father's, studying me with surprising perception. A little, I admitted. He nodded sagely. That's okay. Daddy will fix it. He fixes everything. He placed a block carefully atop his growing structure. He said you found me in the park because you have a good heart. Is that why you're here? Because of your heart? The innocent question struck me with unexpected force. Why was I here? Not just in this bunker, but in Antonio's house, in his life. I had stepped into a world of danger and power struggles far removed from my simple existence. And I had done it willingly, drawn by something I couldn't quite name. I think I'm here because your dad doesn't want either of us to be alone right now, I said finally. Marco seemed to accept this, returning to his blocks. We played for what felt like hours, though my watch showed only 40 minutes had passed when the communication console beeped. Vincent answered it, his posture straightening as he listened. Yes, sir. Understood. He turned to us. Mr. Russo is coming down. The situation has been addressed. The door unsealed with the same mechanical hiss, revealing Antonio. His appearance was immaculate as ever. Not a hair out of place, yet something in his eyes had changed. A coldness that hadn't been there before. Daddy! Marco abandoned his blocks, running to his father. Antonio lifted him effortlessly, holding him close for a moment before setting him down. Everything is fine now, Piccolo. No one will bother Nonna again. The certainty in his voice sent a chill down my spine. I didn't want to know what addressing the situation had entailed. Can I sleep in my real room tonight? Marco asked. Of course. Antonio ruffled his hair. Go with Vincent to get ready for bed. I'll be up to say goodnight in a few minutes. As they departed, leaving us alone in the bunker, Antonio's carefully maintained facade seemed to waver. He rubbed a hand over his face, a surprisingly human gesture from a man who controlled his every movement. I'm sorry you had to witness this, he said finally. Is Marco in real danger? I asked, the question that had been burning inside me since the phone call. Antonio considered me for a long moment, as if weighing how much truth to share. There are always threats. Most are posturing, attempts to unnerve me or test my defenses. He moved closer, his voice dropping. But I can never assume any threat is empty when it comes to my son. Because of what you do, it wasn't a question. Because of who I am. He held my gaze steadily. The Russo family has controlled certain aspects of commerce in this region for generations. Where there is power, there are always those who covet it. You mean criminal enterprises, I said, needing to hear him acknowledge it. A hint of a smile touched his lips. The line between legitimate business and criminal enterprise is rarely as clear as people believe. Laws are written by those with enough influence to shape them. That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give you right now. He reached for my hand, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man I had just watched command an armed security team. "What you need to understand is that my world is dangerous, Emma. Anyone close to me becomes a target. I should have been terrified. I should have walked away. Instead, I found myself asking, is that why Marco's mother left?" Pain flashed across his face before he concealed it. Sophia didn't leave because of danger. She left because she discovered that loving a Russo meant sharing me with obligations she hadn't fully comprehended when we married. "The family business," I said carefully. My father was still in charge then. I was being groomed to take his place. His thumb traced circles on my palm, his eyes distant with memory. "She was pregnant when my father was killed. After Marco was born, she stayed for 8 months before she disappeared." A bitter smile curved his lips. "She left a note saying she wasn't cut out to be a Don's wife or a Don's son's mother." The confirmation of what I had suspected, that Antonio was essentially a Mafia Don, should have sent me running. Instead, I felt a strange ache for the man before me, forced into a role by birth and circumstance, abandoned with an infant son. "And now?" I asked softly. His eyes refocused on me, intensity burning in their depths. "Now I find myself breaking my own rules for a woman who showed kindness to my son." His free hand came up to cup my cheek. "A woman who looks at me and sees past the power and the danger to the man beneath." "I hardly know you," I whispered, though it felt like a lie. Something in me recognized something in him, as if we were pieces of the same broken whole. "You know the essential truth of me," he countered, his face inches from mine. "And I find myself wanting you to know more, wanting you in ways that put you at risk simply because of who I am and the enemies I've made." "Shouldn't that be my choice?" I asked, surprising myself with my boldness. Something flared in his eyes, hope, desire, and fear intertwined. "The smart choice would be to walk away from me now. I could ensure your safety, set you up comfortably far from Westbrook. You would never want for anything. And if that's not what I want," his grip on my hand tightened, "then you need to understand what staying means. Not just the danger, but the reality of my life." His voice roughened. "I've done things you would find unforgivable, Emma. I've ordered men's deaths. I've destroyed lives to protect what's mine. And I would do it again without hesitation." The raw honesty in his confession should have repulsed me. Instead, I found myself drawn to his unflinching awareness of who and what he was. No pretense, no apologies. "Why tell me this now?" I asked. "Because I need you to make your choice with open eyes. Because—" He broke off, something vulnerable flickering across his face. "Because I look at you and see possibilities I thought were closed to me, and that terrifies me more than any enemy ever has." I reached up, tracing the scar on his chin with my fingertip. "What happened here?" A small smile touched his lips at my deflection. "My father. I was 16 and questioned an order in front of his captains. The lesson was that public dissent could not be tolerated." I winced, imagining the teenage Antonio bleeding from his father's disciplinary action. It explained so much about the man before me. His perfect control, his careful power, his fierce protection of Marco. "I should take you home," he said, though everything in his posture suggested he wanted the opposite. "I should say goodnight to Marco first," I replied, making my choice without quite saying the words. Relief and something deeper washed over Antonio's face. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead to mine in a gesture more intimate than any kiss. "Emma Clark," he whispered, his breath warm against my lips. "You have no idea what you're doing to me." But I was beginning to understand. In his world of power plays and calculated moves, I was the unexpected variable. The person who had walked into his life without agenda or ambition, who saw the man beneath the mantle of power. We ascended from the bunker together, his hand at the small of my back. Marco was already tucked into his bed when we entered his room, his eyes heavy with sleep despite his attempt to stay awake. "Emma," he mumbled, smiling drowsily, "you stayed." "Just to say goodnight," I said, sitting gently on the edge of his bed. His small hand found mine. "Will you come back tomorrow? We could have pancakes. Daddy makes the best pancakes." I glanced at Antonio, who watched us from the doorway with an expression that made my heart twist. "If your dad doesn't mind, I'd like that very much," Antonio said softly. Marco's eyes drifted closed, his hand still holding mine. Good, he murmured. Then you can stay forever. Out of the mouth of babes. I carefully extracted my hand from his grip, brushing his hair back from his forehead in a gesture that felt strangely natural. Antonio watched the interaction with undisguised longing, not just for me, I realized, but for this, a family, normalcy, connection. As we stepped into the hallway, closing Marco's door quietly behind us, Antonio turned to me. Stay, he said simply. Not forever, just tonight. In that moment, standing in his hallway with the memory of danger still fresh and the taste of his kiss still lingering on my lips, I made my choice. Yes, I said, I'll stay. Morning light filtered through unfamiliar curtains, painting golden patterns across silk sheets that felt impossibly smooth against my skin. For a moment, disorientation gripped me. The ceiling was too high, the bed too large, the silence too complete. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, and I turned to find Antonio watching me, propped on one elbow, his expression unguarded in a way I hadn't seen before. You're still here, he said softly, wonder coloring his voice. Did you think I'd sneak away? I asked, suddenly self-conscious under his intense gaze. His fingers traced lazy patterns on my bare shoulder. I've learned to expect people to flee once they glimpse the reality of my world. I thought of the threatening call, the armed security, the panic room, all the trappings of a life lived in perpetual readiness for attack. Then I thought of Antonio cradling his son, of his hands gentle on my skin in the darkness, of the vulnerability he'd shown when he asked me to stay. I'm still processing, I admitted, but I'm not running. Something like relief flickered in his eyes. He leaned forward, pressing a kiss to my forehead with surprising tenderness. Marco will be awake soon. He takes his promised pancakes very seriously. The domesticity of the moment struck me. This dangerous man in rumpled sheets discussing breakfast with the morning light softening his features. I reached up, tracing the line of his jaw, the slight stubble rough beneath my fingertips. Is this real? I asked, voicing the question that had haunted me since our first meeting in the rain-soaked park. Or am I just a novelty that will wear off? Antonio caught my hand, pressing a kiss to my palm. You're the first real thing I've touched in years, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Everything else has been strategy, calculation, necessity. But you... He exhaled slowly. You were never part of any plan, Emma. You simply happened. And now I find I cannot imagine a future without you in it. The raw honesty in his words stole my breath. Before I could respond, a small voice called from the hallway, followed by the patter of running feet. Daddy, you promised pancakes! Antonio smiled, the unguarded expression transforming his face. Timing was never his strong suit, he murmured, reaching for a shirt. I clutched the sheet to my chest as Marco burst into the room, his eyes widening when he spotted me in his father's bed. Emma, you did stay forever, he exclaimed, delight radiating from him. Not forever, I corrected gently. Just for breakfast. Marco's face fell momentarily before brightening again. But you'll come back, right? For more pancakes tomorrow? Antonio ruffled his son's hair. Let's not overwhelm Miss Clark, Piccolo. Go wash your hands and face. We'll meet you in the kitchen. As Marco scampered away, Antonio turned to me with an apologetic smile. He's unused to having anyone here besides staff. I should have locked the door. It's fine, I assured him. Though my cheeks burned at being discovered in his bed by a 6-year-old, he seems happy about it at least. He's been asking for a mother since he learned most of his friends have one, Antonio said quietly, handing me a silk robe from his closet. I've never brought anyone home before. Never let anyone meet him properly. The weight of what he was telling me settled in my chest. That by bringing me into his home, introducing me to his son, he had already crossed lines he had drawn for himself long ago. The kitchen, like everything in Antonio's home, was a study in understated luxury. Sleek appliances, marble countertops, a huge island where Marco now perched on a stool, swinging his legs impatiently. To my surprise, no staff appeared to prepare breakfast. Instead, Antonio moved through the space with practiced ease, gathering ingredients, heating a griddle. You really do make the pancakes yourself, I observed, Accepting the coffee he handed me, a small smile tugged at his lips. Some traditions I insist on maintaining. My mother taught me before she passed. I sat beside Marco, helping him arrange blueberries into smiley faces on his pancakes while Antonio cooked. The domesticity of the scene was surreal, this glimpse of ordinary family life existing within the fortress of a Mafia don's home. Daddy makes the best pancakes in the whole world, Marco informed me seriously. Even better than Nona, but don't tell her I said that. Your secret is safe with me, I promised, charmed by his conspiratorial whisper. Antonio watched our interaction with an intensity that made my skin warm. When our eyes met over Marco's head, I saw a question there. A future he was imagining, one he wanted to know if I could imagine too. After breakfast, Marco dragged me to see his collection of model cars while Antonio made some calls. I was kneeling beside the boy, admiring a particularly intricate Ferrari, when Antonio appeared in the doorway. His expression once again the controlled mask I was coming to recognize as his business face. Marco, go find Vincent. I need to speak with Emma. Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. Marco seemed to sense it too, glancing between us before reluctantly leaving the room. When we were alone, Antonio closed the door. What is it? I asked, rising to my feet. The situation from last night has escalated. His voice was carefully neutral. The Castellano family is challenging boundaries that have been established for decades. I need to meet with my captains. I nodded, understanding that this was his way of telling me our idyllic morning was over. I should go. No. The single word was sharp, commanding. He moderated his tone with visible effort. I mean, it would be safer if you remained here for now. At least until we determine if you've been identified as someone of importance to me. The implication chilled me. You think they'd target me? Antonio's expression hardened. I think I'm unwilling to risk finding out. He approached slowly, taking my hands in his. I've assigned 2 of my best men to protect you. They'll remain discreet, but they'll ensure your safety whether you're here or elsewhere. I should have been offended at this high-handed arrangement of my security without consultation. Instead, I felt a confusing mixture of fear and something like belonging, the knowledge that I now existed within the circle of his protection. How long will your meeting take? I asked. A few hours. You're welcome to stay. Use any part of the house. He hesitated, then added, or if you prefer, my driver can take you home with your security detail. I thought of my tiny apartment with its water stains and temperamental heating, now seemingly belonging to a different life entirely. I should go to work. I have a shift at 4. Antonio's jaw tightened. Call in sick. I can't just abandon my job because you've spent the night with a man who has enemies? He finished, his voice soft but intense. Because those enemies might now consider you leverage? Emma, your job at that diner is beneath you, and now it's also potentially dangerous. It's still my job, I insisted. My responsibility. He studied me for a long moment before nodding reluctantly. I respect your integrity, but allow me this. Let my men drive you. Stay nearby. Let me know you're safe. It was the "let me know you're safe" that undid me, the genuine concern beneath the commanding exterior. I stepped closer, resting my hands on his chest. Okay, I conceded. But I need to understand what's happening, why last night's threat has escalated, what it means for whatever this is between us. Antonio's hands came up to frame my face, his thumbs tracing my cheekbones. The Castellanos believe I've shown weakness by taking personal interest in you. They see it as an opportunity to test boundaries. His eyes darkened. They're mistaken. A shiver ran through me at the cold certainty in his voice. What will you do? What I must to protect what's mine. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against mine. I never intended to draw you into this life, Emma. But now that you're here, I find I cannot let you go. I haven't asked you to, I whispered. His kiss was different from those we'd shared in the heated darkness of the previous night. A gentle claiming, a promise, a question. When he pulled back, his eyes searched mine. When this situation is resolved, we need to discuss your future, he said. Your job, your apartment, your place in my life. The statement should have felt presumptuous, controlling. Instead, it felt like being seen, truly seen, Perhaps for the first time in my life, Antonio Russo, with all his power and danger, saw me not as I was, but as I could be. My place in your life, I repeated, testing the weight of the words. That sounds suspiciously like making plans. A rare, genuine smile curved his lips. I believe in strategic thinking. He escorted me to his bedroom, where I found my clothes from the previous evening freshly laundered and pressed. As I dressed, I watched him transform, donning not just his impeccable suit, but the mantle of authority that made him the feared and respected head of his family. When we descended to the main level, a group of men in suits waited in the foyer. Their eyes tracked me with undisguised curiosity as Antonio guided me toward the door, where a different driver waited. "This is Paolo," Antonio told me. "He'll take you wherever you need to go. Giuseppe and Dante will maintain a perimeter." He handed me a sleek black phone. "This is secure. My number is the only one programmed in it. Use it if you need anything. Anything at all." In front of his men, he maintained a careful distance, but his eyes conveyed what his posture could not. I accepted the phone, our fingers brushing in the exchange. "Be careful," I said softly. Something like surprise flickered across his face, followed by warmth. "I'll come for you after your shift," he replied, his tone making it both promise and gentle command. As Paolo drove me through the elaborate security gate, I watched Antonio's home recede in the side mirror. Just 24 hours ago, I had been a waitress living paycheck to paycheck, invisible to the world. Now I was being driven in a luxury car with a security detail, carrying a direct line to one of the most powerful men in the city. My mother had always warned me that life could change in an instant. I don't think this was what she had in mind. I spent the hours before my shift in a daze, moving through my apartment like a stranger. Everything looked smaller, shabbier after Antonio's home. I showered, changed into my uniform, and pretended not to notice the black sedan parked across the street or the man who casually followed half a block behind as I walked to the bus stop. Carlisle's diner was busy when I arrived, the Saturday dinner rush in full swing. Diane raised an eyebrow at my distracted air, but said nothing as I tied my apron and pinned my name tag in place. I moved through my familiar routine on autopilot, taking orders, refilling coffee, calculating tips, all while feeling as though I was watching myself from a distance. "You look like someone rewrote your life overnight," Diane finally remarked during a lull, cornering me by the coffee station. "Spill it, girl." I hesitated, unsure what I could safely say. "I had dinner with Antonio last night." Her eyes widened. "And breakfast, too, by the look of you." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Be careful, Emma. When men like that get possessive, it's not just flattering, it's dangerous." "He's not what people think," I said, surprising myself with the defensive note in my voice. Diane gave me a sad smile. "Honey, they're all exactly what people think, when it comes down to it. The question is whether you can live with that truth." Before I could respond, the diner door opened, and the atmosphere shifted just as it had days ago. But this time, it wasn't Antonio who entered. It was a group of men in expensive suits, led by someone who carried himself with the same confident authority, but none of Antonio's controlled grace. "Table for 4, the leader told Diane, his eyes scanning the diner before landing on me with unsettling recognition. As I watched him being seated in my section, a cold certainty settled in my stomach. This was no coincidence. This was a message, and I was caught in the middle of a power play I barely understood. I reached for the phone Antonio had given me, but hesitated. Running to him at the first sign of trouble would prove exactly what his enemies believed, that I was his weakness. Instead, I straightened my shoulders, plastered on my professional smile, and approached the table with menus in hand. "Welcome to Carlisle's," I said, meeting the leader's calculating gaze directly. "My name is Emma. I'll be your server today." His smile never reached his eyes. "We've heard so much about you, Emma. The Russo family's newest acquisition." In that moment, I understood that my life had irrevocably changed. There was no going back to anonymity, to simple existence. I had entered Antonio's world, and now I would have to learn to navigate it, or perish in its currents. But as I held the man's gaze without flinching, I felt something inside me strengthen rather than cower. Antonio had seen something in me that I hadn't recognized in myself. A resilience. A capacity to stand in the face of danger rather than flee from it. I'm nobody's acquisition, I replied calmly. Now, can I start you gentlemen with some drinks, or do you need a moment with the menu? The leader's eyes narrowed slightly, reassessing me. Whatever he saw made him lean back, an unexpected respect flickering in his expression. Perhaps, he said softly, Russo chose better than we thought.